Maddie Haig, and I'm the president of the College Democrats here at Georgetown. My name is Megan McCourt, I'm the president of the College Republicans. So really quickly, we're just going to go over how this debate is going to work, introduce our lovely debaters for the night, and also introduce you guys to our special moderators that we have here. Also, a big shout out and thank you to IPPS for co-hosting this event with us. We really appreciate it. So first, on the College Democrats side, we have Alec Campi. Hi. Alec Campi. Cam hi. Sorry. We have Danny Levy. Finally, Jake Glass. And on the Republican side, we have Caroline Wool. Matthew Morgan. And last but not least, Peter Hamilton. Alright, so really quickly how this is going to work. The debate is broken down into a series of responses to questions, and then the other side is going to get a rebuttal, and then the side that originally was asked the question gets a response to that rebuttal. It's going to be 90 seconds for the original question to be answered on one of the other sides, and then a rebuttal that is 60 seconds, and then a 30-second response to that.
And then, just to note, this is an annual tradition with the College Democrats and the College Republicans, and normally this takes place during non-election years. So traditionally, the candidates fight based on party platforms, party lines, what traditionally Republicans or Democrats think. This is very separate and distinct from what the current candidates for the presidency call this thing. So just keep that in mind as our debaters debate on behalf of their parties.
And then finally, we do open up the floor to the audience for the final portion of this debate. There will be a few audience questions, so if you have something you want to ask the debaters, make sure to raise your hand during that point, and the debaters will answer that question for you. So now we're going to introduce our wonderful moderators first. I'm going to be introducing Nicholas Johnston. So Nick is a former Hoya and is also the editor of a new media venture that's going to be launching early next year by some of the co-founders of Politico. He's also, before that, he was at Bloomberg for 13 years, where he covered Congress, the 2008 campaign, and President Obama's first term before launching Bloomberg's breaking news desk in Washington, D.C. When he left Bloomberg this August, he was a managing editor overseeing news products for the Bloomberg Terminal, Bloomberg Politics, and Bloomberg Government. Nick's first job in journalism was at the mailroom of the Washington Post, where he covered local finance and technology. And at Georgetown, he was a columnist for the Hoya and a member of the Philadelphia Society. So, welcome, Nick.
And I'm going to be introducing Professor Rome. Professor Mark Rome received his BA from the University of Arkansas and his MA and PhD in political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1992. He has served as a legislative assistant for the Honorable John Paul Hammerschmidt of the U.S. House of Representatives, as a research fellow at the Brookings Institution, as a senior evaluator at the U.S. General Accounting Office, and as a Robert Wood Johnson Scholar in Health Policy Research at the University of California, Berkeley. Mark studies American politics and public policy, especially social welfare policy. He is writing a series of papers on grading ethics. He has written Fatal Extraction, the story behind the Florida dentist accused of infecting his patients with HIV and poisoning public health. John C. Bass, 1997. Public Spirit in the Thrift Tragedy, University of Pittsburgh, 1996, and Welfare Magnets, a new case for a national welfare standard, Brookings Institution, 1990, with Paul E. Peterson, among other book chapters and articles. His most recent publications include the scholarly conference, Do We Want Authority and Tradition or Democracy in Markets? Below the Bible Belt, Religion and Sexuality Education in American Public Schools, and Grading More Accurately. His dissertation, The Thrift Tragedy, Are Politicians and Bureaucrats to Blame, was the co-winner of the 1993 Harold Laswell Award from the American Political Science Association as the best dissertation in the public policy field. Mark loves to teach. At the GPPI, he has led courses in ethics and values in public policy, the public policy process, quantitative methods, among others. While at Georgetown, he has been selected as a teaching fellow through CNDLS, and 3 times has been selected by the students as the outstanding faculty member in the Graduate Public Policy Institute. So please give a warm round of applause for Professor.
Thank you. Welcome. It's It's going to be a long, hot evening. We have a few seats in front if you want to come in, find yourself. Before we begin the debate, I want to give some suggestions for our distinguished panel tonight. Is that I expect the Republicans and Democrats to present sharp differences, and I expect you to present them clearly. But also remember, politics is not just about where we disagree, but finding common areas where we can work together to improve the quality of life in our nation. So in your initial presentations, of course, give your party's platform, but in the subsequent rebuttals, if you might say a word about a common area of interest, a place you might be able to work together with the other party, I'm sure the audience would be glad to hear that. First question is going to be from Nick. Nick, it's all yours.
I think we'll start with tax and fiscal policy, and we can begin, I think, with Jake and Peter first. First question is Alec and Peter. Wait, let's start it. Who's Peter? I'm Jake. Who's Jake? I am. Jake? Yes. And Peter. We're going to go across like this. The question will be for Peter. U.S. budget deficit is at record high. Federal debt is at record. Sorry. The U.S. federal debt is at record high.
Should I give this question? Sorry.
Why can't I was going to go a class like this? Should we do it? Alex again. The first question is on fiscal policy. Who are my fiscal policy debaters? So this will not be a devil's question, this will be about taxes and spending. I got you on. How should this nation change its tax policy to get its national debt under control?
Hi everyone, my name is Peter Hamilton. I'll be representing the Georgetown University College of Republicans tonight. So when we're talking about tax policy, of course there's a broad landscape that we're talking about there inside the United States. But I'd like to focus on the people who are actually most hurt by our tax system, and that is the poor. So when we're talking about poor people inside the United States and about income tax, we need to address ways that we can reduce poverty inside of the United States by giving back the money that is taken from them by the government. And the best program to bring about this goal is through Earned Income Tax Credit. Now, Earned Income Tax Credit is a fiscal policy program in the United States where if you are a single mother with 2 children and the government takes away $1,000 of your wages through taxes, they'll give you back a significant portion of that so that you can spend that on food for your kids and so that they can get to school with proper school supplies. By focusing on allowing lower income individuals inside the United States to get back the money that's being taken from them with the government, we're actually going to be helping those who need it most inside the United States instead of just focusing on corporations, where in fact the United States actually has one of the worst levels of actually corporate freedom inside of the Western world. So when we're looking at taxes and freedom inside the United States, we believe that people know best what to do with their own money. Let the mother with 2 kids spend that money that she has on food for the table, putting food on the table, getting school supplies for the kids, but also on the topic of corporations, letting corporations spend their money and investing it so they can put that money back into the economy instead of the government taking it and reappropriating it someplace else.
I'm Alex Cameron, I'm representing the College Democrats. On taxes, this is a very important issue. I think both Democrats and Republicans agree the tax code is too complicated and needs to be simplified, but where we disagree is how to simplify it. Peter talks first about the Earned Income Tax Credit. He says when families are paying money to the government, if they have children, they can get some back. The problem with that is that they're giving up the money in the first place. They're going to lose that money at some point anyway. What we should be looking more to do is cut taxes for the lower and middle classes and make sure that they keep money in their pockets. They're the powerhouse of the economy. What we need to do is close loopholes for people at the top who are getting away with it. Just a few days ago, it was reported that Donald Trump claimed a nearly $1 billion loss in 1995, which allowed him to evade taxes for 20 years. That's simply unacceptable. We need to reform our tax code.
If you're pro simplifying the tax code and making it easy to follow, you're pro-Republican. And I'd like to respond to one of the statements that you just made. Those poor people who can't spend, have that money being taxed on them, they are going to spend that money anyway. Spending that money on food and clothes for your kids is very different from giving $1,000 out of your $10,000 paycheck to the government. And what we believe is that those people need that money and they can make the best decisions about what they're doing with that rather than giving it up in the first place. And so when you're pro lower class, when you're pro like making it so that we can have change in socioeconomic status for Americans, you are going to be pro-Republican because the Republican platform is one that stands for equality and equity. Thank you.
If you've worked for a minimum wage job, please raise your hands. This will be a question of intense interest to the audience. We begin with the Democrats. Is the current federal minimum wage too low, too high, or about right? If we should change it, what should we change it to? Who will be helped and who will be hurt?
The current minimum wage is far too low, and consistent with the Democratic Party's platform, it should be raised to $15 an hour. A couple points on that. First of all, no minimum wage increase ever has taken place overnight. This would be a gradual change, something that businesses would have time to cooperate with. And because of that gradual change, that's why far more people will be helped and hurt. Let's talk first specifically about the people who will be helped. The people who will be helped are the low-income earners of minimum wage. In fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2014, these aren't just teenagers, though many teenagers do have minimum wage jobs. It's not just them. Over half of people who earn minimum wage are over 25. More are women than men, and more than quadruple of the unmarried population than the married population works a minimum wage job. So we're not just talking about high school kids who are getting a summer job at their local pool. We're talking about single mothers who are trying to get by. But according to Business Insider in 2015, there's not a single state in the nation where you can work full-time on the current minimum wage and affordably rent a one-bedroom apartment. The lowest is in places like Nebraska, where it's 54 hours a week. In New York, it's up to 90. That's ridiculous. We need to raise the minimum wage in a way that businesses will have time to cooperate, but that will lift working families out of poverty.
Hi everyone, my name is Caroline. I'll be supporting the Republican Party. A couple of things about what Alec addressed. There's two really big issues. The first of which he says is in his own speech. He says different states have different levels in which people are able to form income, different levels of housing. That's really problematic considering they're advocating for a single national level federal wage. Obviously, as he points out in his own speech, there's different levels throughout different states. What we would say, maybe some of the wages are too low in certain states, but it's far better to have these local communities advocate and figure out what is the best measure to have in their local communities. The second problem comes with basic economics. If you're in Micro 101, we actually talked about this today. There's a big problem here about the supply and the demand of jobs. Maybe people aren't being paid enough for the jobs that they're doing right now. But what's problematic is also the scope of people who are getting jobs. And under their policy, maybe now people are getting more jobs, but more money rather, but problematically less people are being employed. Not only is that problematic for higher levels of unemployment, but it unfortunately succumbs people to the high levels of racism and sexism we see in the workforce today. Thank you.
Caroline talks a little bit about, first of all, the state level. Democrats have nothing against states increasing minimum wage above the federal level if they want to do so, if they're able to do so. But there's not a single state, like I said, where you can afford a one-bedroom apartment. There needs to be a higher federal baseline. But the second thing is she talks about this whole supply and demand factor. Let's take this to the next level. When you give people more income, there's more demand. If you give it to a poor family who's working to get by, they're more likely to buy something than the guy who already owns 50 pairs of pants. He's not going to buy more clothes. The poor family will. That's going to get more money circulating in the economy, create more jobs.
I have a question about Obamacare. It's the law of the land. Attempts by Democrats. Is that a good one? You guys have an Obamacare guy? Attempts to repeal it have failed. Do I get to do one? You can do an Obamacare one, and the Democrats, sure. Can you stand up for Obamacare? Outline your party's approach to dealing with Obamacare and addressing the problem.
All right, so when it comes to conservatives and figuring out how to deal with universal health care inside the United States, it's clear that there's a wide range. Mitt Romney, who ran for president in 2012, actually instituted something similar to Obamacare inside of the state of Massachusetts. But what's important to note is that that wasn't national, that was in the state of Massachusetts. What Republicans support is allowing states to make their own decisions about health care and the way that it impacts the citizens in that state. If somebody in the state of Texas doesn't want the state mandating what type of health care that they want, they should have the freedom to vote inside the state of Texas whether or not they support having statewide health care. In the state of Massachusetts, it's clear the majority of the population there actually did support that sort of universal health care, and so they allowed it in that situation. When it comes to Obamacare, nationalizing healthcare has come with its own myriad of flaws, and even though it has led to an increase in the amount of, a decrease in the amount of uninsured people inside the United States, the long-term impacts of that policy have yet to be seen, and I would argue that there are many detriments that we can further be shown in my rebuttal to whatever they're going to say.
the Affordable Care Act has done something really amazing that the United States has never had occur in its history before. And that is increasing the base of people who are insured in our country, which is very, very important. Now, Peter talked a lot about the fact that we have a nationalized healthcare system. Now, that's not quite the case. It's still not a single-payer system. In fact, the fact that Mitt Romney implemented this plan in Massachusetts indicates that it's actually quite a conservative plan. So when you consider the fact that this is the best free market solution for healthcare, it's really, the Affordable Care Act is the best we can possibly do if we want to ensure that all Americans are given the opportunity to purchase healthcare, no matter what their income is. When states do this, it becomes something horrible. It becomes piecemeal. If people move across state boundaries, that's a problem. Most states in the country probably wouldn't implement their own plans, or they wouldn't do it very well. And state healthcare portals are extremely difficult. Even though healthcare.gov had issues at first, it's actually gotten much better since then, and we've been working on it, which means that more people have gotten access, and the ACA really isn't a problem.
All right, so to put some context on the numbers of the amount of people who have increased in insurance under Obamacare, it's around 2% of the U.S. population. So when we're looking at long-term sustainable plans to make sure that every single American can get healthcare, like both sides support, you're not going to be looking towards a system that forces people to buy into healthcare, that forces healthcare providers to provide healthcare to people who aren't paying into the system as well. And essentially, you're not forcing people to pay into a system that isn't going to work in the long run. When we're looking towards Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, and the way that it's implemented inside the United States, forcing companies to provide products to people isn't going to bring about high-quality products. If you want high-quality health insurance for Americans, you're going to want to go with this private healthcare system.
So I believe that Republicans and Democrats can agree that we want to have an America where we all live in communities that are safe, that there is no violence between citizens, and especially not between citizens and their police forces. Now, we may be able to agree on this, but it's clear that blacks and whites in America see our society quite differently in terms of the relationships between police and the community. Democrats, I ask you to comment, what should the federal government do to produce communities that are safe and free of discrimination regarding the relations between the police and the community?
Hi, my name is Daniel Levy, representing the College Democrats. I think there are several steps the federal government can take to ensure that we have better relations between African Americans and police, and there's quite a few very simple ones. First, better training programs for police, because right now we see there's a lot of implicit bias when it comes to relations between police and African Americans. It's very obvious in the facts that an African American is more like 17% more likely than a white person to have their police be physical with them, 18% more likely to be pushed into a wall, 16% more likely to be handcuffed, 19% more likely for a police officer to draw a weapon on an African American, 18% more likely to push an African American to the ground. These are actual statistics done by the National Bureau of Economic Relations. There's obviously an implicit bias on right now within the police training. So we need to ensure that there's better standards for training to ensure that there's indeed better relations between African Americans and police. But furthermore, we also need to have outside independent prosecutors and independent oversight boards of police to allow greater cooperation between civilians and police. Because the only way police systems works is if there is indeed trust between civilians and police. By having a civilian process within police departments, we allow greater trust to be built between police and African Americans and the overall community. That ensures that police can do their duty to protect and uphold and serve the community, because they'll be listening to the interests and what the problems that the community gives to the police department. So we have these two sort of pillars established from a national government put onto the states and local communities. We'll see greater civility and greater overall police between and less racial tension between African Americans and police, and indeed police will be better able to fulfill their job of upholding and protecting and serving the community.
So I swear I'm not the only person arguing for the Republicans tonight. We've just gotten a lot of my topics early on. So we agree about better training programs for police force. So I don't think anybody's against that. And referring to your actual statistics, I can counter that with some facts of my own. The city of Baltimore had a black mayor, a majority black police force, and a majority black city council. And yet they still have terrible relations between the police department and the members of the community. What we need to focus on is increasing the community police force dialogue and making sure that communities trust the police. If the community doesn't trust the police force can't do their job whatsoever. And our main focus is decreasing crime inside the United States. And the only way we can really do that is by increasing police presence and making sure that the community and the police can work together in a productive way so that they can actually bring criminals to justice.
I'm not sure why Peter's on the Republican side, because that sounds a lot like what Democrats talk about. When Donald Trump talks about stop and frisk, racial profiling, law and order. These are things that polarize the community and police officers. Because when indeed police officers decide that person's probably a criminal, might as well stop and frisk them, and violate the Fourth Amendment rights, that creates a hostile environment between the community and the police. What Republicans advocate for is indeed a greater presence, maybe, and that may be good, but it's also a more aggressive presence of police, and that harms relations. So indeed, if you want indeed better relations with African Americans and police, you have to indeed side with the Democrats.
I'd like to ask a question on Syria, which is an unmitigated humanitarian disaster. Let's start with Democrats. Is the president doing enough?
Is the president doing enough in Syria? The Republicans are probably going to argue that the size of the United States military has decreased drastically over the past few years. We really need to spend more, that sequestration is causing all of these problems. Maybe they would even advocate for a boots-on-the-ground approach in Syria. But the simple fact is that we have been making headway against Syria, and our diplomatic relations with Russia have definitely been moving forward. Right now, the Syrian government is on the verge of collapse. The value of their currency, the Syrian pound, has dropped by more than 50% over the past 2 years. The government is scrambling, trying to get money. They burned through $17 billion of foreign cash reserves. All of this because of the fact that they're lacking in international support. They really only have Russia and Iran, while NATO and everyone else in the United Nations is hostile to them. Because the United States is succeeding at its approach of using airstrikes, working with our allies, like the Kurds, like the Iraqis. And the simple fact is we're doing a pretty good job, and any more military intervention is simply going to lead us to some poor policy like we did in Libya, like we did in Iraq.
Hey guys, I'm Matt Moriarty from the Republican side. I'm actually not going to talk about any of the solutions I'm not going to give any of the answers that you said I was going to give. The situation in Syria right now is the single greatest strategic and military, but also the single greatest humanitarian failure of the Obama administration. And it comes from a long series of policy decisions dating back to 2009 that allowed a giant power vacuum to basically be opened up, and Islamic terrorism filled the void. Basically in 2009, after the surge, we had ISIS, we had Al-Qaeda in Iraq incredibly subdued, and they were on the defensive basically. By the time 2013 rolls around, and Obama defaults on his red line policy to keep Assad from using chemical weapons against his people, Barack Obama essentially just took the United States out of the Middle East, and he said to Russia and other countries, please come in, we need your help. Please come in, we need your help getting chemical weapons out of the region. And after this long series of terrible policy decisions, we are at this place right now in Syria, and Barack Obama has been completely complacent.
I don't think it's correct to call Obama complacent in the entire Syria situation. We've been putting a huge investment along with our NATO allies in Syria in order to encourage airstrikes. We're collecting intelligence on the ground. We're working with other nations in the region, and we're trying to put a stop to the horrible humanitarian disaster that the Assad regime has caused. But we're trying to do it in a way that doesn't put more and more American soldiers' lives on the line, which is something I don't see how anyone could disagree with. The simple fact is that the Obama administration has been doing everything possible within the bounds of reason, because we've seen how badly a boots-on-the-ground approach has been gone before.
On September 19th, the convoy made into Aleppo was...
You don't get a bonus.
Question we'll give to the Republicans regarding free trade. Politics is about making choices and weighing trade-offs. By most economists' account, more trade across national borders leads to increasing wealth for the countries that involve in trade, general gains to the public, but also most economists agree that trade can lead to specific losses within a population by those who do not benefit but have their jobs at risk. Would you please provide the Republican vision for the future of international trade?
Absolutely. So the Republicans are obviously a party that believes in free trade for all the reasons that you stated. It creates growth over large sectors of the economy. But it's important to understand that over the past 30 years, low-skilled workers have been left behind. And if you want to understand why free trade is such a keynote issue in this election, it's because because of that anxiety that's felt across Rust Belt states, where the series of policy decisions leading from NAFTA to the admission of China to the WTO in 2001 has created chaos in these communities, and they feel as though that trade policy is leaving them behind because all of that growth is going to the upper halves of people, high-skilled workers. It's raising the cost to acquire skills in our economy. And essentially what the Republicans are saying is that we need to, and the Democrats would have never gone back to this issue had it not been put front and center by Donald Trump. We would be pushing through TPP as we speak. What the Republicans are saying is we need to go back, we need to revisit the issues where low-skilled workers have been left behind, and we need to come up with solutions to spread that growth around. And if that means dismantling old trade deals, then that's what we're going to have to do, because what's happened over the past 30 years is criminal for these low-skilled workers.
Same question for the Democrats?
Okay, so I'd like to just quickly remind everyone that when NAFTA was drafted, it was quite bipartisan. Everyone was pretty happy with it. And it's just been in the years since that, and especially now that we have such huge polarization with problems in the Rust Belt, with people who are unhappy about the decline of American manufacturing, that we've seen free trade as this horrible thing. Now, there are instances of bad free trade deals, like the TPP, which I think we can all agree was written by multinational corporations that simply want their interests over the interests of American workers because they could buy goods cheaper overseas and sell them back to us at a higher price. And other countries like China, Vietnam can manipulate their currencies and gain an advantage on us. But we do have a future where we have free trade agreements. It's just not when they're written behind closed doors like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Other free trade agreements that don't lead us to some sort of economic isolationism, that allow us to thrive as a country, to have trade with other countries, but also take a hardline approach when countries like China manipulate their currency, devaluing it intentionally so that they can sell us goods and our manufacturing sector continues to go on.
Well, I don't believe you just put forth an entirely democratic answer, because it's currency manipulation and revisiting the trade deals that were put front and center by the Republican program in this election. But again, you're missing the key point, which is that we need to go back and look at domestic programs. So if we want the growth that comes from free trade, we need to go back and create new policy schemes to share around the growth that comes from free trade. The TAA insurance that has been used over the past 15 years has been woefully inadequate, and I don't see from the Democrats that same commitment. It's why white working voters are flocking to the Democratic Party right now, because whether you like it or not, your party is realigning with special interests, and that's why the sitting president would sign TPP in part.
Before we throw it open, we have another question.
I'm going to follow the list that I wasn't following earlier. Actually, want to learn about now. This will go to the Republicans first. The United States will hit its debt ceiling in March. Should it be raised?
Still Caroline. So I think that this issue kind of brings us to talk about the larger issue of fiscal responsibility. I don't think anyone would get up here and say you shouldn't pay money you've already spent. That's absolutely absurd. This question opens up to the bigger conversation of how we should spend our money in the future, not how we spent it in the past. And there's a couple things we need to look at. Both parties agree on that front. It's now what we need to look to in the future. Specifically, what the Republican Party would stand for is having higher levels of fiscal responsibility, and this is important for a couple of reasons. One, you can see that we're only placing a higher debt on future generations, but this is even harder to solve for in the future, because specifically, a lot of the government spending right now, which has a very low multiplier effect on the economy, only suppresses wages in the future because you take money out of the private sector and put it back into the local sector. Specifically, the Phoenix Center did a report, and it found by just reducing federal spending in areas by just 5%, we would not only see $75 million go back in private GDP, but specifically annually we would see a 1.2 million increase in jobs. We think that's very beneficial in one, injecting money back into the economy to solve back for a lot of the problems we've unfortunately already created, but it also makes solving back for this debt a lot easier when people have higher wages and can contribute to the economy more.
The question was, should the debt ceiling be raised? And the answer is yes. The debt ceiling should be raised. The debt ceiling should be raised for a few reasons. First, it's really bad to default on our debt, and that's exactly what's going to happen when we hit the debt ceiling. But let's talk about what raising the debt ceiling means. They talk a lot about fiscal responsibility. It has nothing to do with that. It doesn't authorize any additional spending or cut any spending. It doesn't increase or decrease taxes. All it says is we're going to fulfill the obligations that Congress has already said we're going to fulfill. If we don't do that, that poses a severe threat to the credit of the United States, which is an absolute disaster and will cause global economic harm. Indeed, economist Doug Holtz-Eakin says, the global financial system is built on the notion that U.S. Treasuries are absolutely safe assets. If we put a crack in that foundation, the global financial system will crater and have a global economic recession. It's vital that the U.S. remain a safe harbor for international and domestic investors, and we raise the debt ceiling.
Okay, a couple of responses. First, both parties have agreed in the real world, and I'm pretty sure in this debate we're not talking about not paying money you've already spent. That's what both parties have agreed on. A couple of problems. One, Alec talks about cratering the world's economy. The only thing critical for the United States economic viability is paying back its interest, which the government is very, very capable of doing. He would need to prove that we have no assets to pay back any of our interest. But secondly, and more problematically, I would say by just continually raising the debt ceiling without having a better conversation about more fiscal responsibility, we just create a slippery slope argument where it's not viable for us anymore to talk about our fiscal spending. We just keep raising a ceiling without having a discussion.
At this point, I would like to ask a question about voter ID. I was hoping you'd ask to do this. In a democracy, it depends on the ability of the people to choose their leaders, to elect those who will govern them. Voter laws are controversial in the United States. The tension between making sure that individuals have the ability to vote and making sure that those who vote are qualified to vote. Republicans, what is your plan for the future of voter ID laws in our country?
Okay, yeah, still Caroline. So there's a couple of things. I think this opens up to a really big conversation on why voting is so important in the United States. One, it's very basic to our democratic foundations, but also the integrity in voting is very, very important to ensuring trust back in the system. I'm fairly confident that my opponents are going to come up here and say that there's a lot of racist intent. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but on a factual basis, according to the Independent Voter Project, only 0.5% of registered voters don't actually have the requisite voter ID rather, specifically go to the polls. But even if you don't want to look at that, even the strictest voter ID laws actually allow you to go back within a week period to present new identification. Your vote will still be counted. So let's talk about the reasons that really matter, why we would actually see an increase in voter turnout. There's two reasons. First, I already talked about its trust. In communities where there is even a single instance of voter ID fraud, there's this rampant idea that there's no voter trust, there's no trust in the system. Specifically, the Washington Post finds that when we go back and prosecute against these people who have committed voter fraud, we see more trust and an increase in voter turnout. The second way we increase turnout is through mobilization. But the LA Times finds specifically by increasing awareness about needing a voter ID law, we see a 1 percentage point increase in voting. I would say everyone voting is the best thing for both parties.
So let's talk about this notion that voter fraud is a big problem. What voter IDs do is sort one form of voter fraud, in-person voter fraud. So if you go home and you say you're John Doe, but you're really some other name, that stops that. There's only 31 instances in the past in the entire 21st century of that ever occurring. So you're more likely not to graduate from Georgetown in 4 years than voter fraud to ever occur. So it's not even a big problem. Yes, voter fraud and absentee ballots can be a problem, but this one sort of voter fraud puts a giant burden upon American citizens. Because according to the 2014 article from the Washington Post, voter ID laws nationwide would actually disenfranchise 21 million Americans. 11% of the eligible voting population could not vote if we had stringent voter ID laws. And these ID laws hurt people who are African American, Hispanic, poor, young, old, people who cannot afford to go out to get their birth certificate over there and their driver's license over there. It's hard on these people who need to have better things to do, like going to their job and getting money, or they're just too old to ever do those sorts of things to begin with. Voter ID laws put a giant burden upon these different groups and overall disenfranchise them and give no tangible benefit. Who cares if 31 pieces of voter ID no longer happen? What's the impact? There is.
So a couple of things. First about, Andy and I both agree there's a lot of reasons why people don't go to the polls. He in fact talks about himself, things like having a job. Those are other structural issues that really don't have a place in this debate. First of all, he says that voter fraud isn't a big issue. I never come up in here and said a big issue. The matter of the fact is we have the law right now. We're looking at the future implications, not the past implications. But specifically, even if there are very small amounts of voter fraud, I talk about the perception of voter fraud. Even if it's not as rampant as neither of us would like to believe it is, in these trust we have in these communities. Specifically, he also said that it disenfranchises 21 million people. That doesn't make much sense considering only 0.5% of people don't have the requisite IDs.
And now, we have questions from the audience.
This is a question specifically directed at Republican guy in pink shirt. I forgot your name, sorry.
It's not the worst thing I've done.
I'm trying to just be as accurate and factual as possible. You mentioned something, I think you were talking about police reform, that the only way to reduce crime is to increase police activity in the area.
Yes.
Wouldn't you say some better ways are increasing education, increasing security, increasing the judicial system, increasing the prison system? Aren't there better ways to decrease crime without threatening people?
Without killing people?
I said threatening.
Okay. Well, yes. The best way to stop crime is also to stop killing people. I agree with that. But so when it comes to the communities inside the United States, you asked the question, is the best way to prevent crime, which is breaking rules, to stop correcting people, which is telling people to not break the rules anymore and show them how to not break the rules. And I disagree with you on that point. Sure, increasing education is good. Having a solid economic environment is good. But the number one way to bring down crime in any community in the United States, inside of the United States, is to increase police presence. And now the focus is whether or not that police presence is good or not. And I think we both agree, both parties agree, that we need to have good police officers on the street. But even the LA Times has stated in its editorials, from like fairly liberal sources, that the number one way to decrease the amount of like riots and basically looting that goes on in a lot of cities inside the United States is to increase the police presence that's there and to make sure that people are following the laws. When it comes to race and inside of the United States society, I'd like to quote Senator Marco Rubio. Those of us who are not Rubio for me. Those who are not African American will never fully understand the experience of being black in America. How I feel is a reality that we cannot and should not ignore. But I don't think we need to paint this picture in the United States that police officers are the bad guy. And so when we're focusing on bringing our communities together, we need to make sure that police officers are the good guy and that they're taking down the bad guys in our society.
I really agree with Peter here that we want a better United States. We want better relations with police and communities. That's police are there to protect communities. But I have a few problems with the things he said. First of all, I agree. Education is probably has great correlation to reducing crime, reducing poverty, many other economic programs beyond just having police reduces crime drastically in the long term. But in the short term, we talk about police. He talks about greater police and more police overall leads to less riots, less looting. But I have a problem with that, mainly due to the fact that when we saw, for example, in Ferguson, what actually exacerbated riots, and also in places like Baltimore, is when police show up with riot gear, with military equipment, with things that are better suited for Iraq or Afghanistan than in the streets and cities of America. What we have a problem with is that there's no more, with things like this, we see a decrease in trust between communities and police. And that even if we have more police, if there's no trust and there's no bond between police and communities, then they can't do their job effectively. Because the community no longer trusts the police, and police are afraid of the community, and that leads to an overall degrading relationship. What we need overall is police to take steps to reform, whether it's oversight and accountability, more training, body cameras, things like that. When we have those things, we can have greater trust between communities and a better America overall.
Okay, so I'd like to bring up that the people who brought up the idea of trust and police-community interaction were the Republicans at this debate. So thank you for agreeing with us on that point. But when you're talking about riots in Ferguson, for example, Jill Lovey of the Los Angeles Times, a liberal herself, writes, "It may seem paradoxical, but the police tactics that protesters have recently denounced as harassment and discrimination actually overcompensate for what is, in essence, a weak police presence in these neighborhoods. We wouldn't have those riots and lootings in the first place if we had a strong police force there taking care of the community." So this whole idea that police are cracking down too hard right now, that wouldn't be an issue if we had good cops patrolling the streets and making sure that the people are safe. The argument against strong police presence, what's your argument? We should have weak police presence inside the communities? That's not going to solve crime.
Just so all the students know, we're giving each party a minute to answer the audience question. So
And a rebuttal?
we should have made that clear before.
Can it be a minute 30?
If the question is particularly directed at one party, if it's a general question, 1 minute.
Hi, my question is open to both parties. So, as I hope you're aware, even though there is legislation that attempts to ensure equal pay for equal work, there still remains implicit bias in the workplace, which makes the fact that women are earning less than men, and that problem is magnified in women of color. What is the role of the government in reducing implicit bias and ensuring equal wages for equal work?
Thanks for your question. At the College Democrats yesterday, we were just talking about equal pay for equal work. This is a crucial issue, and it is the government's job to stand up for every citizen's equal protection under the law. That includes equal pay. Equal pay is a crucial issue. They say, well, women are just in lower paying fields. That's empirically false. They say that women work fewer hours to take care of children, also empirically false. You see that young women, just a year out of high school or out of college, at their highest level of education, before they could even possibly be worried of taking care of their family, are earning only 82 cents on the dollar compared to men. There's no bias there. It's not like men have had so much time to get farther in their field, or like women are taking care of families or anything. That's just sexist bias. It is the government's responsibility. It is the government's responsibility to ensure equal pay for equal work.
Okay. Hi, I'm Caroline. Yeah, this really isn't a political issue. Speaking as a woman and speaking as a Republican, there are lots of implicit biases we see in the workforce. I'm not going to really respond to anything Alex said because it's true. I think there's a lot of strategies the government can take, and I think a lot of the things Alex said are really, really correct. I think some other strategy you can also take, go back to things like we talked about, like the earned income tax credit, which I think is a really efficacious way of putting money back from your taxes that you pay from the government back into your pockets, so you can have extra capital to spend things on like childcare. So if you are a single mother, you can go and have your work. This really isn't a political issue anymore, and I mean it does seem to be a topic in the 2016 election, but it should.
Hi. So Syria came up in this debate, and the crux of one of the points that was made was the negotiations with Russia currently. This morning, the administration announced that those negotiations have come to a close, and then Russia this afternoon actually deployed anti-missile systems in Syria for the first time, heightening the chance that some potential war could break out in that area. How do you think both sides this affects future negotiations moving forward, and how we should deal with the Syrian crisis? Thank you.
So is this a minute or a minute 30?
A minute.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yes, thank you for bringing that up. Today, the United States and Russia's relations sort of fell apart on the issue of Syria, which is a serious problem, and you might think, oh, the Obama administration has totally failed. Ironically, this is an instance of the Obama administration actually doing what Peter brought up and said we should have done in Syria with Assad, with the red line on chemical weapons. Now Russia is doing things, they directly opposed our military forces. For example, in a number of places we're fighting in Syria, for example, Mosul, Russia has been fighting directly against American troops in terms of like airstrikes. We've been trying to defeat ISIS, but they're trying to support the Assad regime, and it's not working out. And Russia has officially just decided to be a complete antagonist against the United States. There's no longer a forward-looking diplomatic relation going on between us, and the United States put our foot down. We're like, we're not going to continue this sort of discussion if you're not going to stop striking our military bases and our installation, or not our military bases, but trying to strike rebel strongholds in places where we're pushing back on ISIS. So it's the United States taking a more important stance in Syria, and it proves that we will eventually get better relations with Russia, but we're doing the right thing now.
Well, you essentially just described how we have absolutely no diplomatic leverage to get Russia to comply with any of the sort of directives that we're trying to put in place in that region. And I'm struggling to understand what administration you're pegging that on other than the Obama administration. I mean, it was that moment in 2013 when we allowed them into the region, when we said that we needed their help to disarm Assad with chemical weapons, that this entire situation began. And we do not have any diplomatic credibility in the region to compel them to follow any of our directives. And on the larger Syrian question, the fact that we do not have a no-fly zone over Syria right now, the fact that we do not have safe zones in the south to ease the humanitarian refugee crisis is a total failure on the Obama administration. And you can rest assured that as soon as he is out of office and a Republican is office, we will start to gain credibility in that.
I'm Caroline. Hi, Caroline. I know this issue or this debate is not about the current election, but I just want to know how the Republicans in the room can justify supporting a president.
We're not going to steal they're being very courageous in front of their peers, so we're going to respect the timeline. All right.
If you want to talk about why Republicans support Trump, you can ask me later.
Well, then my question is global warming real and what should we do about it?
Hi, Caroline. I guess I'll answer your question. Kind of thematic. Yeah, global warming is real. I think that it's become a political issue. There's some people in our party that don't think global warming is real, and they're entitled to that opinion. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help combat global warming. I think like what's one of the most problematic things we have right now is there's not a very viable market for there to have, green technology and things like that. So I think that looking towards like the way the markets work and having green technology be a viable solution, we need to ensure that those markets are more viable, because if you just impose something like making carbon more expensive, unfortunately there's other different levels of carbon between things like natural gas and coal that just ultimately route the markets towards things like that that really harm global warming elimination processes in the future.
Yes, global warming is real, so says every scientist, and every scientist says it's man-made as well. It's good to know that the next generation of Republicans might be coming around on this issue. Caroline talks about green energy. Green energy is a crucial thing to invest in. Republicans also talked earlier today about cutting spending and cutting taxes across the board. If we cut spending all the time, we're never going to be able to invest enough money to be able to invest in this green energy that's going to move us away from fossil fuels and other harmful forms of energy that have contributed to global warming. There are a couple other steps we could take too. We need to pursue global action. The Paris Agreement is a good start. That's getting close to going into full effect. We need to use our position as a world leader, show the world what the United States can do to combat climate change. Maybe that's a carbon tax, maybe it's cap and trade. Use our leverage on the international stage and others will follow suit, and we can combat this problem.
So this is directed towards the college Democrats. So when you mentioned a solution to, this is kind of going back to the police accountability issue. So when you mentioned a solution to police accountability in relation between community and police force, as suggesting kind of like a community, a citizen oversight of the police force. So when it comes to the judiciary system and their prosecution of police officers, and this system is already inherently flawed because you have the prosecution team for these police officers being prosecutors that have previously worked with these police officers in other cases, so they have an inherent bias towards these officers. Do you think citizen oversight can expand towards this issue, or do you think there's a bigger picture that we should be looking at on police accountability?
That's a really good question, actually. Thank you for asking it. I think that, I prefer to have members of the judicial system, like prosecutors, and be part of that, and not have a much oversight in it. I think what we need to do, though, in cases of police violence cases, or have special prosecutors, outside prosecutors who don't actually actively work with big police in other cases, come in and prosecute those cases, mainly because they no longer have that conflict of interest to not prosecute police officers. So we have special prosecutors or a team of that working on only those sorts of cases, so they don't have that conflict of interest. I think that really resolved a big problem that we have in the judicial system, which is this conflict of interest comes up between prosecutors and police officers. So I don't think citizen oversight in prosecution is needed. I think we need special prosecutors and outside prosecutors doing that instead.
All right, so I completely agree with that. We should have unbiased, fair lawyers and judges go into a case when it comes to judging whether or not a police officer has committed a crime. That's not partisan. The partisan part that you didn't agree with is citizen oversight committees, which is a completely democratic ideal. That's not something the Republican Party platform supports. And so when it comes to these communities, and we're talking about the prosecution of police officers, the Republican Party supports unbiased, fair panel of judges, jury of your peers, moving forward in that situation and making sure that they are prosecuted for their crimes justly. No Republican is going to say that if a police officer breaks the law, that they should get away with it just because they're a police officer. We believe that they need to be held to the same standard, if not higher, because they are an officer of the law, and that they need to be brought to justice if they are breaking those laws. But we agree in this case that there shouldn't be citizen oversight committees. The amount of tension I think that adds to the community would not be beneficial to building the community police trust that we talked about earlier.
I think we're going to take 2 to 3 more questions. I know I saw your hand earlier. Do you still want to ask?
Can each party give their view on immigration and immigration reform?
So I'm going to
my grandparents actually escaped from North Korea, and my grandma came to the United States and lived here for 13 years separated from my mother so that she could build a home for them to come to the United States. And so when people look at me and they talk about America and the international politics, like I have a very interesting perspective on that because the only reason I'm alive today is because the United States got involved in Korea and fought for the freedom of South Korean people. And so when we're talking about immigration, the United States is a great country because we accepted immigrants. We accepted anybody who wanted to come here, who wanted to build a dream for themselves, and who wanted to protect their family. And Republicans today still support that. Even with some of the rhetoric that's floating around, the crux of the matter is this, okay? Republicans support good immigrants, immigrants who have followed the processes legally to come to our country, and who have demonstrated that they are going to be an asset to the American community. When it comes to illegal immigration, you've broken a law. And I don't think it's fair to the immigrants who came here legally, to people like my grandmother who had to wait 13 years to bring my mother here, that those people should just get in scot-free.
I support a lot of the ideals Peter talks about. I think we have a very similar sort of goal. Well, I different thing in the solutions we have. First, on visas, which I think are a big part of like immigrants coming in, overstaying visas, for example. We need to make sure that the visa process is much more fair to immigrants and also provides immigrants who are skilled, whether it's in STEM research or other sorts of pursuits, have a pathway to citizenship or green cards or permanent residency. Because that's sort of why they're here. They're here not just to like show off their job, but also to build a better future in America. But also for immigrants from Latin America, from South America, from across the world who, may feel the need to come here illegally. We need to find a way to make a better pathway to citizenship, much more like legal pathway, that doesn't take 13 years for a parent to come here. It's really not fair for those immigrants, and it incentivizes them to come here illegally. That's the problem, is that we have an incentive right now for illegal immigrants to come here illegally, because it's much easier than to go by the legal means. So we need to make sure there's a way for immigrants in other countries to come here legally, and once it's expedient, year at most process for them to come here legally, and for immigrants currently in the country who are here illegally, have a pathway to citizenship for them. They're not here to break the law. They're here because they want a better future for their families. They're not here to kill all of them. They're here because they want a better future. And so we give them a way to and provide that better future.
All right, this one's for the college Democrats. So, do you think the Obama administration's unwillingness to enforce his red line warning? Do you think that invited Russia and Iran to the region has overall escalated the humanitarian crisis in Syria? And if not, then who do you say to blame for the humanitarian crisis, and how do you justify our serious lack of engagement in the region?
Yeah, so I do not think that Russia and Iran decided to come into Syria just because of the United States' lack of enforcement on its red line policy. The simple fact is that there is a lot going on right now in the Middle East, and that the United States and the international community as a whole has made a series of blunders that mean we really need to, scrutinize any sort of policy decisions we make there. Which is why our latest steps have been working with our NATO allies, working through the United Nations Security Council as much as we can, and trying to get things done in a way that combines both diplomacy and ensuring that America looks strong in the region. I think Russia and Iran came in because they saw that there was a power vacuum. That power vacuum was not the fault of the United States. The rise of ISIS in the last couple of years is not the fault of the United States. The simple fact, yes. So Russia and Iran went into Syria because they saw that there were benefits to supporting the Assad regime. They already had sort of problems with the United States, and we've been working on our relations with them. And those relations, they're going to move forward in the future. The Obama administration isn't doing anything differently than, for example, the Bush administration would do if it were in the exact same situation. We have foreign policy issues, and they're being dealt with in the best, most diplomatic ways possible, rather than invading a country just because.
Again, I would just point to the complete lack of diplomatic credibility that we have in the region after so much is taking place. In 2009, when the decision was made to withdraw from the region and we abandoned a large Sunni minority in Iraq, that is absolutely inextricably tied to the rise of ISIS in the region. And you cannot say that there was a power vacuum left by anybody but the United States. And it was said in 2009, Obama went to Cairo and he spoke before the Muslim world, and he said essentially that we are going to stay out of your way and we are going to be pulling back for our region. We apologize for what's taking place. And that is absolutely responsible for the power vacuum that we now see Iran and Russia filling. And if the United States has two key priorities moving forward in the region, it is to help the beleaguered Sunni minority in the Middle East, and it is to keep Russia out of there at all costs, because they are the definition of a bad diplomatic actor.
Yeah, I think you guys both sides talked a lot, really well in depth on policy. But with it being an election year, I want to know if I could ask each side why you each belong to your respective policy simply, or respective party simply, and why I should vote for either one of your parties.
You want like every single one?
Everybody gets to answer that one. But briefly.
I'm not going to make anyone say who they're choosing to vote for, but I think it would be very beneficial to say why they align with certain.
Why are you a Democrat? Why are you a Republican?
That's fair.
That's fair.
One paragraph.
Yeah. I know I don't have to say if I do support my president nominee, but I am proud to. I'm a Democrat because I believe in equality of opportunity, I believe in social equality, and those don't have to come at the expense of freedom. There are simple issues on the table in every election. They could be minimum wage, they could be race-related, they could be taxes and spending. On every single one of those, you look to the Democrats for the party of equity, for the party of equal opportunity. We don't want to leave anyone behind. We're not working for the well-connected or just for those at the top. If you want to go for that, you can go for the Republicans and do it.
A short paragraph.
You want to go with equality of opportunity, go with the Democrats.
I'm a Democrat because I just believe in equality of people, that anywhere, like, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, that some way you have a path to become a better person or improve your own situation and make sure that those, like your children, have a better future because you're in America. That's why I think the Democratic vision for America, which is one of equality of opportunity, equality of just any access to opportunity, is one that I really support. So that's why I'm a Democrat.
I'm a Democrat because I believe that equality of opportunity is extremely important, and while businesses provide us with great economic opportunity in many respects, the government also has a really important role in ensuring that everybody remains able to have access to that equality of opportunity.
I think that talking about this question in this election year is very, very interesting because A, we have a very interesting candidate, but I also think it's a very different thing to be a Republican in 2016 than even it was 4 years ago. Honestly, I align with most social issues completely with my friends over here to my left, and I'm honestly proud to say I'm voting for Hillary Clinton this November. I think for me, it comes down to a couple of different things. I think that we talked about, like, both of us agree that the private sector has a lot of opportunities. I personally think it has some better opportunities than some government intervention we've seen in the past, and maybe we'll see it.
I'm a Republican because I believe that people rely on the government to grow the economy out. People actually depend on government policy solutions to foster economic growth. And unfortunately, when you talk about Democratic platforms, economic growth is sometimes placed secondary to other issues, whereas I believe that that should consistently be the most important issue on the table always. How can we grow the economy? Because that's what people need most from the government.
I believe in the core tenet of Republican values, which is equality of opportunity, so I'm glad we agree on that. But this is how I was raised. The way I was raised when I was a kid is that the playing field needs to be fair, and we believe in the equality of the start, not the outcome. And that's why I'm a Republican. I'm a Republican because I believe that the voice of the farmer means just as much as the voice of the Wall Street broker. I'm a Republican because I believe that the voice of the high school dropout has just as much legitimacy as the voice of a Georgetown student. And so when I look at my political values, I believe that we need to get the government out and the people in. And that's why I'm
That was a great finish. I want to say, as a Georgetown graduate from 1999 and a debater, you guys were awesome. And I think